Have you ever lost your cool with your kids, vowed you'd never do that again, only to find yourself yelling at them an hour later or a few days later? Yeah, that's happened to me too. How about this? Have you ever found yourself lying awake at night wondering if you're doing the right thing or if you made the right decision for your child or if you just totally screwed up their life? Sounds like me too. Well, I want you to know you are not alone. This is what happens to all good parents. But as a child psychiatrist and mother of two, it's my goal as the parent doctor to help you find some useful answers about how you can prevent these things from happening and have each day be better than the last. After all, we all are striving to have a trusting, connected relationship with our kids, and we all want to launch kids who are ready to be adults in this great big world. Parenting is not just about raising successful kids, it's about raising ourselves, mastering our own emotion regulation, breaking cycles, and creating a home and life filled with love, resilience, and connection. If this resonates with you, please join me in the Empowered Parent Club. Follow, rate, and share this podcast with anyone that you know who would benefit from it. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Parent Doctor podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Marissa Caudill, and today I am thrilled to welcome Jesse Roselin, who is the founder and head of school at Pacific Preparatory. Welcome, Jesse.
Thanks for having me, Marissa.
Yeah, so for all of you listening, you may not know what Pacific Preparatory is. It is a K through 12 online school that offers bespoke educational opportunities. It's accredited, and they serve students all over the US, but really all over the world. And Jesse and I have been friends now for, I think, over a year. He is a really forward-thinking educator and connector of like-minded people, and I enjoy being part of his group called Reimagined. So we're going to be talking a little bit about his origin story with Pacific Preparatory, how he got into education and thinking about creating a form of education that really isn't the traditional one-size-fits-all approach that most of us think of when we think about school, right? And our kids in school. So tell me a little bit about this. How did it come to be, Jesse? How did you start? Did you know always that you were going to start your own school? That's a big deal.
No, I did not know that I was going to start my own school. I think some people really know what they want to be when they grow up. As a young child, my father taught international environmental law, and so we traveled all over the world. And people would ask me as a young kid, 5, 6, 7 years old, what do you want to be when you grow up? Yes, I really had no idea. So I would just say, I want to be a pilot because I like the planes and we traveled around. I knew I didn't actually want to be a pilot, but I knew that also answered the question for people. So I said,
Right.
I want to be a pilot. Fast forward to college, I still had trouble deciding on a major. For all those people who are worried about, you need to have that very clear path. I think we'll get into that because I'm not sure that's so true anymore in terms of, having that narrow focus. I did know I loved working with people. I loved thinking about how people think. I ended up majoring in psychology and minor in international relations. And I then started volunteer teaching in a 5th grade classroom. I was at Stanford, and one of the recent graduates was Teach for America, teaching at a school right down the way, 5 minutes in East Palo Alto. And they came back and said, hey, we're looking for volunteers to help kids with reading because I really need the one-on-one help. And I said, okay. And at that time, she wanted me there at 9 a.m., which was painfully early as a senior at Stanford. But I know that sounds crazy now as I'm up at 6:30 in the morning with my kids. But I did it. And that started me on this journey of, you know what? Why don't I try? I like teaching. I like tutoring. Let me try teaching. So I joined Teach for America. And then 25 years later, now I'm the head of school at Pacific Preparatory, the school that I started back 23 years ago. So it really wasn't a clear path, but the focus was on helping people and helping kids. And I think that was the thread that ran through it all.
I think there's something really important in what you just said. I think so often when we see people, especially at our age where they've reached some, I don't know, I don't want to call it that we're at the pinnacle of our success because who knows how far we're going to go. But once you've reached some level of success, to the outsider, it looks like, oh man, this person must have been on this linear path to where they are today throughout their whole career. And that is so not how it usually is. I think for any kids who might be listening or parents of kids, it's really important that we let our kids know that's not usually how it goes. And even if you talk to people who are really successful, most of the time, They didn't start out from a young age knowing what they were going to be. As a physician, I think a lot of people who are physicians got a ton of reinforcement early on when they threw the
Mhm.
first time that idea of maybe I'll be a doctor. All the adults in your
Mhm.
life are like, ooh, a doctor. So then you're like, oh, yeah, I'm going to keep saying that, just like you keep
Right.
saying pilot. I was laughing because you majored in psychology and I'm a psychiatrist who never took a psychology class. So again, it's like an example of how you just have to go with the flow in your life and trust that what you love and what your skills are. So you know that you love helping people. Me too. And we're doing that in different ways, but very similar ways. So yeah, I think it's very good to keep in mind, both for the parents who are listening and the kids who are listening, you have to just trust that it's going to turn out okay. If you're someone who's interested in doing something meaningful, you're going to find the way to make that happen. And you can't know what it's going to
Absolutely.
be when you're 5 and 6. I don't even know why we ask children, what are you going to be when you grow up? How can they know? We were just discussing before we hit record that when I think about education and I realize how much my thoughts about education have shifted, it's been a dramatic shift, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, I would say. And I was telling Jesse, my kids are 12 and 8. Before I became a mom, I just assumed, because I am highly educated, my husband's highly educated, we value education, that will be what we'll value in our kids. And we do, but I just assume like my kids are going to go to the best possible school that I can get them into. And I'm really going to make sure that they do all their work and they do well in school. And I'm going to want them to go to the best possible college that they can go to. And I was telling Jesse, I remember my neighbor like 10 years ago or so, who had kids who were a little older than mine, saying something like she was open to the idea that maybe her sons or kids wouldn't go to college at all. And I thought, what? Are you kidding me? That was just totally not in my mindset that my kids might not go to college. I would feel like a failure as a parent if they didn't. And now, fast forward 10 years, the world has changed so much and it's only changing faster and faster. I don't know if it is that necessary anymore, even though, ironically, I think more people are going to college than ever before. But I also think as the world shifts, the answer isn't as clear anymore. I think, again, for people who are doctors and lawyers, it still is. You need to get a certain amount of schooling, get a degree,
Of
pass
course.
the exam, do the thing, get the rubber stamp certification. But for many people who do many things that make them a lot of money and lead them to be very productive, contributing members of society, that's not necessarily the path anymore.
I totally agree. I think that what we know based on our personal experience growing up, born in the late 70s, we experienced in general a pretty traditional schooling experience where there are different programs, Waldorf, Montessori, traditional schooling, but in general, you're in a classroom, you have somewhere between 20 and 30 kids, depending on whether it's an independent or private school versus a public school or parochial school. But there's not a huge variation. Overall, you're pretty much within the same general category of you're in desks. Maybe if it's really progressive, you're around tables or you're in groups of four but overall, the model is pretty much this focus on one teacher to a group of students. And we've moved over time beyond the lecture model to more hands-on experiential work, but it still hasn't moved that significantly compared to what we've seen with technology, where I don't know if you remember, I'm sure you do, a time before we had email. And my freshman year of high school, there was no email. And it was, I went to the Marine Waldorf school. Actually, we should take an aside here because I think my education was a little bit different than most because I had so many different experiences and have
Mm.
seen so many different educational models. And I think that's why I'm more open to progressive education and reimagining education because I have personally benefited from so many different educational models. So in the beginning, I started at a Waldorf kindergarten. Then my first year, first grade, we went to India because my dad got a full break to India and we lived in outside Bombay and we were there for a year. And did 2 days at a Catholic school, writing on the chalkboard, got the answer wrong. Teacher took out a yardstick ruler, hit me on the hand, stung like the Dickens. And
I'm
told
sure
my
it was a little bit
parents,
shocking after coming from the Marin Waldorf school to be slapped in India.
oh my God,
Totally different mindset.
talk about a marked contrast. So then my parents said, I don't think this is the right school for our family, for you. And so then basically I just was, quote, homeschooled and kicked around the house in India, learning all kinds of things that being a totally different country, like noticing that eggs weren't refrigerated and eggs weren't in cartons. They would actually wrap the eggs in paper. And I was fascinated as to how they didn't break and how careful you had to be and all the different things. And how ants would crawl up on the table, but if you put a saucer of water under each table leg, the ants couldn't crawl. They die in the water, so they wouldn't crawl up the table. So all these things were very educational in a just living experiential way when I'm
Yeah.
6 years old in India. Then come back and I'm at the Water School. I go to the open classroom, which is yet another kind of mixed age learning, hands-on experience. Then I go to Marin Academy, college preparatory, really focused on the academics. Then I actually take a gap year before college. And so I go down and I do working experience, I travel, and I'm learning about life in those ways with having a job, making money for college because I want to contribute towards Stanford in terms of the finances. So then I go to Stanford and then I end up going to Oxford for 6 months and learn the tutorial model there and have literally 2 hours of class a week because I had 1 hour with each professor for these two classes. And that also sparked my interest in what now is Pacific Preparatory. Same Oxford tutorial, one-on-one classic education, teacher and student, but advanced for the modern era where we're meeting on Zoom and using all the best tools and best practices for education. So I think my own educational experience, being able to learn in all these different pedagogical styles and curriculum styles and philosophies really helped me see multiple perspectives on education and has informed how I approach problem solving for kids that are struggling in whatever way. They're either under challenged or they need remediation. They're struggling in a particular area. We work with all kinds of learners, all kinds of kids, all socioeconomic levels, kindergarten through 12th grade. Locally, like we can be in Santa Monica with you, or we can be in Dubai or London. Like we're global and local at the same time.
Yeah. I think that's really amazing. So many directions I want to go with what you just said. You just said so many great things. So I think your educational experience was super unique. I grew up in New Hampshire, which is a very small state. I don't even know if there was like Montessori or Waldorf school. Maybe now there is. Now there definitely is. There was in the 80s. My parents certainly weren't aware of it and didn't even think to put us there. It was just like we went to the same public school my mom went to, right?
Right.
And then in high school, I went to the same Catholic school she went to because it's like if it was good enough for us, it's good enough for you. Are you a parent who wants to read all the parenting books and you have maybe a growing list or stack on your nightstand, but somehow you just never seem to find the time to get to them? If so, I totally relate to you and I want you to know I'm here to help. Every month on the third Wednesday, I read, summarize, and present a parenting book that I have chosen that I think is a great one. And I do this via Zoom. If you'd like to get into the Empowered Parent Book Club, go to theparentdoctor.com/book club. This is totally free. It's a public service that I provide. And everyone who signs up gets access not just to the replay in case they can't make it to the live Zoom, but also to an actionable PDF that I create custom for each book that we read. So I would love to have you. This is a growing community now of over 200 members. These are like-minded, engaged, energized, supported parents who want to be more empowered for the sake of their kids. If you'd like to join us, again, please go to theparentdoctor.com/book club. See you there. And I have to say, I loved the schools that I attended for the most part. They did a good enough job, but I knew no different.
Right.
My kids now are getting such a different experience than what I had. But the commonality is in all of these educational models that I experienced that the assumption is you're there as the student to ingest and regurgitate what's being delivered to you, what someone else decided you need to learn. And I don't know, you're talking about the Oxford model. That's similar in that this expert is there to get you thinking about things. but not necessarily to tell you everything you need to know, to stimulate about it and get you to go learn and dig in. Now, I think that's great for a college level student. I don't know if that works for a 5-year-old so well, but I do think there are developmentally appropriate ways that we can get kids to be learning in their natural environment that are less constrictive than what we traditionally do now. As a child psychiatrist, I see so many kids who are 5, 6, 7 years old. And just there's a lot of kids who there may not be anything wrong with them, but there's going to be some kids in the full spectrum of childhood who really have a hard time sitting still for 8 hours a day in a classroom
Absolutely.
listening. Does that mean that they have ADHD and they need to be on medication? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe they just need to be moving as they're learning. And maybe they're the kids who would have been better in the 1800s where they're on a farm, learning how to do something on the go. So I think the beauty of Pacific Prep, it sounds like, is that you have that flexibility to play to an individual child's strengths. So tell me a little bit, what does that actually look like? Because I understand in theory what you do there, but I don't really understand in practice how you go about fitting an individual learner with the right curriculum.
Yes, that is the key, is fitting the individual student the right curriculum for where they are at academically in terms of their content knowledge, in terms of their learning style, and in terms of their emotional state, whether they are experiencing a lot of anxiety, depression, fear around school. Can't underestimate the power of the feeling state of their emotions. That is such a key part of our work. If you are a student that has been struggling with reading for several years and you now have developed an identity that I am not a good reader, and then that really hurts your self-confidence and your self-esteem, a lot of what we're doing is providing the scaffolding, care, and support to help you both learn to read, but also start seeing yourself as a reader, start seeing yourself. And that is revolutionary for the child to see themselves so differently. And I think what we see throughout everything we do at Pacific Preparatory is the highest level of attention to detail and care that literally is impossible to do when you have 30 kids in the classroom.
Yeah.
We know, I was a classroom teacher. I taught 8th grade. I've had 90 kids and I wanted to help all of them. And the system did not allow me. I didn't have enough time to be with all of them in the day to give them the specific needs. So the idea of Pacific Preparatory is that we can do targeted instruction for each child exactly where they need it. So that could be a single class, that could be a couple classes, it could be full time. And to get away from this whole model of we start school in September or August, depending on where you are, or if you're on the quarter system at Stanford, it was crazy. They started October 2nd one year, but you start at the beginning of the year and you go till the holidays and then you break and then you come back and you have this structure, which is really beneficial for kids to have that ritual, to have that structure for parents. Our whole world is structured on that. But at the same time, you need to understand that when a kid is having trouble, they might need to come to us for X period of time, and that may not match up with the traditional school model, right? If there's a child, for example, or a young adult who's a sophomore in high school, and they are experiencing a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, they need to leave school for a period of time, they can come to us at Pacific Preparatory full time, but we can start slow. We can start with a couple hours a week, even while they're in therapy, while they're getting help, while they're getting support. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. And then we can continue on the timeline that works for them. We don't have to stop June 10th. We can say, hey, we can extend this. We can have fewer hours per week of instruction and extend that out into August.
Yeah.
We can speed it up if they're feeling better and they have more energy, they have more focus, and they're starting to get excited. So the key elements for us are looking at custom program, and that means both duration, we can start any time in the year. We can build out the program, even if they've done half of the work, we can assess what work they've done, say in Algebra 2 or US history already, and then build out the rest of the program. No other program I know actually does this because it's truly customized. We actually have curriculum specialists and educators that are coming in and actually able to look at those assessments, look at what the student has already done, and then build out based on what they already know, what they need to learn, what their learning style is, what their energy and ability to focus at that time is, and then teach in a way that aligns with that learning style. And this is where I get very excited about technology, is where if a student really benefits from auditory learning, we can actually use some of the AI programs to create podcasts out of the textbooks that they're learning to help them learn that content. This leads us into a very exciting world of education where we can really start getting the content to the students that's engaging for them, that's at their level and exciting. And that's, as you can tell in my voice, that's what really excites me, is like getting kids excited about learning. And that's the key of Pacific Preparatory. Like, we get kids excited about learning again.
I love that. I love everything you just said. And I think anyone listening, as you're saying that, I'm thinking this is ideal, right? And so much of the public school system, which again, my mindset before having been brought up in the public school system is it's good enough and like it works for most people and you shouldn't want more than that. But the reality of the public school system, as I now know, is that it was born out of the Industrial Revolution to train us to basically to give kids a place to go so their parents could be working all day, and to train us to be little factory workers ourselves in the future. It's a really outdated model. And there are things about it that do work, but do they work because they're really the best way to do something? Or do they work just because we like to keep the status quo and it's what we did when we were kids? And so we accept that's what our kids should do as well. Like the whole, we go to school from September to November, then we take a week off, then we go again for a month, and then we take 2 weeks off, and then we go again for like the structures of schedules and things like that are one example where I think there is actually a lot of data that homeschoolers and people who educate themselves throughout the year, they do better. They don't have that summertime, what do you call it, the slip or whatever, where kids often
Learning
like
loss,
learn in the summer. And I think, like you're saying, to have the ability to cover a curriculum, not just from A to Z, because that's what the book says to do, but to be able to assess what does this person already know, so you're not repeating things that they've known. Because maybe you have a student who really loves history and has been reading about the Civil War since they were 6 years old, and now you put them in AP US history and they're like, I already know that stuff. So at Pacific Prep, you have the ability to like just go into I had this professor in med school who said, I need to know what the cutting edge of your learning is. If I don't know what's that bleeding edge, then I can't really build on what you don't know and help you. So yeah, that's really what an ideal educator would do. And I think that's where we realize that whether it's public school or private school, our traditional educational systems don't do that very well. They just assume that everyone's a blank slate, which we're not. So I just read this book. I do my monthly book club this month. It was a book called Stolen Focus by Johan Hari. It was great. It was also a little terrifying, but it was really good. Anyway, he talks in it about this school in Massachusetts. I'd have to go grab it right now to remember what it was called, but it was essentially like an anti-school. Like they have a K through 12. It's private, and they literally have teachers available, but there's no curriculum. Like the kids just go there and do whatever they want. And surprisingly, like they all become literate, and 30+% of them go on to secondary, like to college education. I don't know what the national statistic is on public schools, what percent go on to college, but it was surprising to me that I'm like, even if all the adults in the world just disappeared tomorrow, like kids somehow would teach themselves and learn things. Just like you were saying, the visual of those saucers with water preventing the ants from getting up the table. Like I think humans are resourceful and we figure things out. And I think sometimes that native inquisitiveness that we have, all of us, kids especially, gets a bit squashed in our traditional educational system. So how does Pacific Preparatory keep that alive? Like how do you keep kids actively involved in their learning? Is there any kind of reverse classroom sort of models or problem-based learning, or what kinds of things do you guys try?
Again, it really is based on the student, and I'm a little skeptical of the school you just mentioned.
It's pretty extreme.
It's pretty extreme. I did just use and just Googled and got the AI overview that in October 2024, 62.8% of recent high school graduates aged 16 to 24 were enrolled in colleges or universities.
Okay, so it's
So,
half of the rate. So it's doing worse than that with no apparent effort.
so I think that is definitely, I think even for me, that is the fear. Like you bring up, I think many people think of Pacific Preparatory in the same way that you mentioned this school, where it's, oh my God, is this okay? Is my kid going to thrive in this environment? And for me, what I find is the perfect balance is, and when I think I have three kids myself, so thinking about the best education for them, the perfect balance is the highest quality teacher, the highest quality customized curriculum, and then teaching in a way that engages the student. And so what that could mean is, like, for your example of the student who's very interested in the Civil War, it means, okay, maybe this kid really needs a boost in terms of learning how to, instead of saying we're going to read My Antonia and some like standard English 2 book from back in the day, we are actually going to pick a book about the Civil War that is going to already engage the kids. So they're going to be motivated to learn. And then from there, we can teach the skills around writing development. So a lot of it is flipping the classroom, like you're talking about, in a way that we focus first on what is the student interested in and what is their appropriate level. Because if you just think, it's really apparent in sports, right? Or if you are trying to run, and I'm not a runner, my wife is a runner, but if all of a sudden they're like, you need to go with this team of runners and they're like all on the triathlon team, they're going to go way too fast for you. And at the same time, if you're going with my dad's 88, he moves very slowly and he's on this crew with walkers, that's going to be too slow for you. You're going to be like, I'm way faster than this. So you need to be in the same way academically. We can see it. It's so easy. There's no shame oftentimes with sports. You're like, that's the varsity level. I'm at the JV level. Like, that's too much for me. This is my appropriate level. And then I can build my skills up to that point. So it's the same thing as like with a coach, a sports coach, they're getting you to build up your muscles, to build up your endurance, to be able to run faster and faster and a longer pace, depending on whether you're going for the 50-meter, 100-meter, 400-meter, whatever your goals are, right? Same thing with the academics. We need to build the scaffolding, build that coach, build that kind of support and start, okay, like specific example there. Let's say you are a fourth grader and you were in COVID and you are missing some of your math fundamentals. We need to go back and be like, there's no shame here. There's nothing you should be guilty about. Like, you just didn't learn this. So let's actually figure out what you learn, like what you know already. And okay, so you need to relearn mixed fractions. You need to relearn decimals. You need to relearn exponents. No problem. Let's start with the stuff you do know. And then they're like, I hate math. What do you hate? Oh, I like baseball. Oh, let's do all the examples for math with baseball. And then they start building up their confidence. They get fun. They build a relationship. And then the key is the relation. Once they start really bonding with the teacher, then all of a sudden you can push them a little bit further to that bleeding edge of their capability, of their potential, like you were talking about. You then truly understand. So this is everything we do at Pacific Preparatory, is getting that teacher to meet one-on-one so that you can literally see how the student is doing the work. Like when you're in a classroom setting, you can imagine as a parent, like, you don't know most of the time what your kids are doing between 8:30 and 2:30 or 3 p.m.
I have no idea
They're
what my
at
kids are doing right
school.
now.
So we can imagine, though, in general, that if you have 20 kids in a class or 30 kids in a class, the teacher is coming around and checking that they're doing their work and maybe answer a question here or there. Imagine the difference like this, like you and me sitting here for an hour, we're looking at each other. I can tell if you're paying attention. I can see whether I'm talking too long, and I'm aware that I'm talking too much. I'm like, oh, this is a podcast, but I still should moderate myself and make sure that I'm not talking too long. This makes sense. But this kind of focus really, and this as a psychiatrist, you get this. You're trying to see what's going on inside their brain in terms of their understanding by seeing facially what's going on, what they're saying, and what they're demonstrating, whether it's a math problem, whether it's writing, whether it's summarizing what they read. And we actually have, most of our work is on Zoom. That's how we get the expert teachers to whatever location we are. But we also have document cameras that are looking over the students' work. So we are literally seeing them when we do an assessment for math. We're literally seeing how they solve that problem. We're not just plugging it through a computer and being like, you got 60%, so you're at a D plus.
Right.
No, we are actually looking through, oh, they actually do understand those fractions. They're making one mistake right here. They're forgetting this part. So we're actually so focused on every aspect so that we can see more deeply how they're learning and what their processes are. And then, to your point, then expanding off that, taking them to the bleeding edge and helping them learn.
It sounds like such an ideal educational process. What about the social emotional aspect of school? Because a lot of kids are getting a lot of their peer development, personal sense of self, all of that stuff is happening in their peer groups when they're around other same age peers at school. Does Pacific Preparatory do any activities with students to allow them to have that kind of similar experience in person or on Zoom?
That's a great question. First of all, yes.
Not that
Yes
you
and
have to,
yes.
because I also feel
No,
that everybody is responsible for their own life and their own kids' social life. So I could see where this could be, even if you didn't do anything, the educational aspects of Pacific Prep are so great that then your kid would have many other opportunities to do things in real life with their friends. And that would be fine.
that's the perfect point, Marissa. It's multifaceted answer. And in terms of one, we know we're on Zoom right now doing this podcast. You do a lot of your psychiatric work on Zoom. Like, we meet all the time on Zoom now. Kids need to know how to meet on Zoom to
Absolutely.
interact with people around the world. We know that. At the same time, meeting in person is critical. Going to school, learning from your peers, critical. So I see it as a yes and. So in many cases, you can be enrolled in your local school for 5 or 6 classes or 7 classes and take a single course with Pacific Preparatory to get that targeted instruction exactly where you would benefit, whether you're gifted or need mediation or whatever it is, or developing a passion. If you then, alternatively, you need to come to us full time, maybe you come to us full time for a period of time because of those mental health reasons. It could be, in fact, that you're getting very negative peer interactions at your school. You are struggling with addiction. You are exposed to a peer group that is not positive. You are engaging perhaps with a teacher who is not a good match for you, who you are finding is actually negative in terms of your own development. And so you could drop that particular class with that teacher and then have a very supportive teacher with Pacific Preparatory. They say, you get what you get and you don't get upset. Like, you can't request a teacher. You're just going to get this teacher. And we're like, we're the opposite. Like, we will give you 3 choices, 4 choices. Like, these are different teachers. These are their bios. These are their styles. Which one do you think? Do you want to talk with them? Do you want to meet with them on Zoom? Do you want a trial session? Then they say, okay, I want to do this one. Then they meet with them for 3 times and they're like, you know what? It's just not clicking. Great. We'll get you another teacher. Our goal is to get the best match for you. So it's totally different. On the other hand, also, if you are a kid that some kids come to us long-term full-time because they are artists or athletes or whatever their craft is, they don't want to be in a traditional school because they're spending so much of their time doing that craft. And so for them, they can get those social opportunities in other ways. So if you're like a professional, let's say, gymnast, you can be getting all that peer and social interaction from the other people on your team. And you can be getting all those kind of interactions because the education that we're so targeted that you're able to get all your academics done in 3 hours a day if you're with us full time. So 9 to noon, and then from noon to 8 p.m. is all social, peer, all that stuff.
Right. Yeah. Thinking about so many things. You were talking about the different speeds of runners. And my experience educationally was that in elementary school, I was always like really far ahead. In middle school, I became like the substitute teacher in the classroom. So I would be like asked to help other people.
Mhm.
And then I would be the student that the teachers would ask to pass notes. Again, there was no email, right? When we were in middle school. So my teachers actually, who'd all worked at the middle school for decades, would have the trustworthy, smart kids were the ones that they would send on note running errands. Basically, these teachers were functioning like junior high school students themselves, but like passing notes in the class. So I spent my days literally just running around the school, passing notes between the teachers, helping out other students. I was not challenged at all. I don't think I learned anything in middle school, literally, maybe except for how to divide fractions. I do remember that lesson very like, it was a low point educationally. Then high school was for me very challenging, but not in the Oxford model of learning a lot necessarily, but in the busy work. Like I went to a Catholic high school where if we keep the kids busy, they'll stay out of trouble. So it was just a lot
Mhm.
of homework, a lot of reading. I remember staying up sometimes till 3, 4 in the morning and then setting my alarm for 6 a.m. because I'd have so
Oh, wow.
much reading to do and writing. And then I was on ballet and sports teams and stuff like that too. So what I honed early on, I think, was the ability to entertain myself in my internal world and tolerate boredom, which I think is a skill my kids do not have at all now because they're just so used to being entertained all the time. I don't know, though, that it's necessarily a wonderful skill to develop, like the accepting you get what you get, you don't get upset. There's some value in that. I don't want my kids to be people who blow up at the slightest problem in life. At the same time, I also want them to know it's okay to imagine things as better than they are currently and going for that. So yeah, I guess I'm reflecting as you're talking about all of this and thinking about how I became who I am and if there was hidden value in the less than ideal educational experience I had. It certainly did a good enough job, right? And I do think there's been a huge shift in kids having more homework now than they ever had. I didn't have any homework until 4th grade. And then in 4th grade, you got one worksheet a night. My kids have started having homework in kindergarten. And now they get like a packet in 2nd grade that they have to complete by the end of the week. And they start doing daily assignments. So it's a totally different vibe in education now. And I don't know that there's a ton of value in it. In fact, the studies show that like homework doesn't exactly correlate with academic outcomes until high school, I think is what I remember reading.
Well, this is the same problem we're seeing of a traditional mass model where you basically have your direct instruction, which is the teacher teaching the students how to do something. Then you like explicitly on the board traditionally, and then you have guided practice, which is then the students try to do it and you help them along. And then the homework is supposed to be independent practice. But when a teacher just assigns like to your in Catholic school gives so much homework that you keep the kids out of trouble, they're assigning every kid in that class problems odd in the math book 1 through 60.
Yes.
And the reality is that some kids don't need that. They already get it. They could do 3 problems and they know it. And so this is where if you have more adaptive AI type homework, like you can see where the kids are, if they get it, they can move on to something more challenging. And this is my hope for the future in terms of the positives of technology and AI. And then the kids who actually need the independent practice probably end up stopping after 10 problems because they don't understand it and then they can't get the help that they need. And so you can see on both sides, it's too much. There's only say half of the class would benefit or some segment of the percentage of the class would actually benefit from doing those problems. The other kids like only need to do a couple and the other kids need to go back to the guided practice and be taught in a slightly different way. So all of this is to say that for a certain segment of the population, it's going to be spot on. And then for the other kids on the end of the bell curve, you want to have what they call differentiated instruction. But in reality, it's so hard for any teacher to actually do. And so as we see
it, scale 1 to 30, you can't really do it. No one can.
And so that's where my hope for the future is, where we can give teachers more resources so that they can more effectively teach the kids on the outside ends of the bell curve, and to recognize that some of those kids there should be triage, just like in the ER, like we should be triage. So these kids like, okay, these kids are all good. This kid here needs small group instruction, maybe with 5 or 6 kids. And then these couple kids over here are so advanced or need so much remediation that they should have targeted one-on-one instruction. to bring them up to speed or to advance them to their potential. And so I see this mix and match model where you can still have all that group learning and then have the individual or small group when you need it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would be ideal. Jesse, thank you so much. I want to leave people on maybe a hopeful note. Now, you and I both see students who struggle. Oftentimes, that's the reason parents are bringing their kid into a child psychiatrist, academic struggles, or failure to be able to fit in that perfect fit of a traditional model, which not everybody can, leads to a lot of mental health problems, like feeling like you're a failure, feeling like you're dumb, feeling you just can't do it, whatever it is. Anxiety, depression certainly could come out of there. What advice, I'll chime in with my thoughts about this too, but for parents who are listening whose kids may be in that boat, who are probably feeling lots of frustration themselves that their kid is not stepping up or not leaning into whatever is hard, and frustration with the school, maybe, or with the teachers, what advice would you give parents in that situation to try to see the potential in their child, even if they're struggling, and to think about how they can advocate for their child? I know I'm putting you on the spot with this question, but do you have any thoughts about it?
I love that question. I think so many parents, we love our kids so much and we really hurt when they're hurting and we want them to do well in school, to do well in life, to have fulfilling lives. And to see them struggle is really hard. And I think it's, even if you are a teacher or you are a psychiatrist or you are an expert in the field, it's also very challenging, especially as the kids get older, to help your own kids. Like, it's one thing to give advice or to consult or to help another family from as a professional. It's often really hard to help your own kids. And so I think the first thing is to recognize that you are not alone. When we all live in America in our single family homes, it can really seem like you're alone and these struggles are unique to you. But there's so many other families and kids out there who have kids that learn differently, who have kids that have mental health challenges. And there are so many resources available to us now that you can access through Claude, ChatGPT, Google, call Marissa, call me, call friends, ask your school counselor. There are so many resources out there. And once you can tap into some of those resources, this is why I've developed such a wide network with you and so many other professionals, is because there are people to help. And what can seem so difficult, so challenging, so dark when a child and a teenager is experiencing such hard mental health problems, depression, anxiety, or other addiction or other challenges, you can really see that with appropriate support, things can turn around so quickly. And it seems like for that day, for that week, for that month, things are so difficult. And 6 months later or a year later, I've seen so many kids transformed. They're excited again. They're healthy again. I have heard this time of year, I actually get a lot of emails and calls from parents looking back. Their child is now graduating from high school. They're going to college, and they look back to that time several years ago where their child couldn't get out of bed. They couldn't leave the house. They had all these things, and they worked with us for a period of 3 to 6 months. And now the child is happy and engaged and studying what they want to study and passionate. So I think it's have that understanding that there is, through personal connection and through people that care, there is enough of a community around us that we can help all these kids. And it can be profound. You
Yeah.
can have a full 180-degree like orientation from being bullied or having identity challenges to a year later. I'm not saying it's all rosy. It's hard work. It takes grit and perseverance. There is a light that can happen where you can see a year later where the kid is in such a good place.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's very true from my experience as well. And a couple of things you said really resonated with me. I think the general theme that I see as a psychiatrist is, like you were saying, we love our kids so much. And especially as they get to that end of high school time, I think as parents, if they're struggling, it evokes shame and guilt because we feel like, shoot, did I screw this up for my kid? Did I fail them in some way? And then you're seeing the end point at which you can have an influence on their life. The runway is ending and you're worried, like, are they not going to launch? Am I going to, it just evokes anxiety and panic, I think, in the parent that then leads to a mindset of worst case scenario thinking that makes it really hard to do what you just described, which is take a step back, detach, realize you as the parent you can't be the drill sergeant, you can't be the tutor, you can't be the teacher. From the beginning, I've known that with my kids, and I've let the teachers know I will not be on my kids about homework. So if there's ever a problem where they're not doing their homework, that's between you and the student, my child. Like, please don't email me telling me they didn't do their homework. Talk to them that they need to do homework because I'm not going to be reinforcing that. And I've let my kids know, like, your academic performance and how much you're engaged with school is up to you. If you're going to be a really involved student, that's up to you. I'm not, like, that's your choice, right? You can be someone who's really interested in school and wants to do well, or you may decide you want to do other things. That's okay. So I think to be able to step back and not be on them, because often what I'll see is as a kid starts a downward spiral of anxiety and withdrawal or depression and withdrawal, the parent, in an effort to help, comes on them heavier. You got to do this. I'm getting you the tutor. I'm doing this for you. I'm getting you the therapist. And then the parent gets more and more frustrated. I'm working harder than you are, kind of thing. And it leads to this loggerheads like fight. And so I think the first step is the hardest step, which is stepping back and realizing what we need to do as parents when our kids are struggling is take a deep breath and realize with the inner vision that we have that our kids don't have because of our life experience that, like, we know they're going to be okay. They may not be on the trajectory we had imagined for them, but they're going to be okay. Whether it's a year from now or 3 years from now, like, they will get where they're meant to go if we can just calm down and let them have the space to calm down and figure out the path that feels right for them. And the distress they're experiencing is just a sign that the path they're on right now isn't the right path for them. And your job isn't to fix it. It's just to help them find the right way to get to wherever they're going and to figure out whatever that is. And it's often fraught, like you were saying, so many things can be going on between those years of like 13 to 18 of gender identity, sexual orientation, so many things that are really big things that then in comparison, how you're doing on the algebra kind of pales. And it's important.
Exactly.
So I think also we just have to have that calm confidence as parents that, like, to know and to communicate to our kids that we love them, that we know that they can do academically and personally and all these things. And we have faith that they'll get there. And just to give them open doors, one of which might be something like Pacific Prep and those kinds of educational options. But if that's not possible for you, there's probably other options where you are. I think your point of asking, because you probably do feel alone and like you're the only one going through this, but I promise you're not. And once you start asking and talking to people, you'll see that's true. In my clinical experience, many parents who have kids who are struggling with depression or anxiety, eating disorders, suicidality, they do feel like that's something they can't talk about with other families. But
Right.
I wish that I could connect them. I can't, obviously. Once you meet other people and you know you're not alone going through that, it's a huge relief. Yeah.
And in the education world, there are more resources in terms of being able to join groups and talk with other people. And even in the medical world, like in terms of cancer survivor groups, there are groups that you can, peer groups that you can join. The biggest thing that really resonated with me about what you just said was in terms of the anxiety of the parents and that leading into the kids is this deep anxiety of I'm not with the rest of the group.
Yeah.
I'm not on the same path. If I don't graduate in these 4 years and go straight into college and straight into medical school and straight into a psychiatry
My life is
residency,
over.
my life is over. And you know what? There are many different paths. And as we're seeing in terms of you going back to the beginning of this conversation, you're talking about like maybe some kids don't even have to go to college. Many of the jobs that our kids are going to be doing, we don't even know. Those jobs don't even exist
Steve
right now.
Jobs
So
didn't get a college degree. Hello, he did pretty
exactly,
good.
exactly. So just recognizing that if we support our kids and support them with that education, with the mentors, with the medical help if necessary, these things can ultimately lead them to the path, even if it's not a direct line.
And honestly, the non-direct paths are way more interesting. So I think we have to embrace it.
Absolutely.
I like people who have non-direct paths much more than I like the boring people who had just like A, B, C, D. They're just more colorful characters. It makes you a better human, more relatable human. All right, Jesse, I'm going to have to go and wrap this up, but this has been a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for talking with me. And for anyone who wants to know more about Pacific Preparatory, I will put information about that in the show notes, as well as Jesse's contact information so you can reach out to him.
Great to talk with you, Marissa. Really fun.
All right, thanks so much. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.